In the salt-weathered harbour of Millbrook Bay, where fishing boats outnumber dreams and the scent of low tide mingles with diesel fumes, Evan Callahan thought he'd seen every kind of engine that could sputter to life on the water. For 15 years, he'd been the town's go-to mechanic, his calloused hands bringing dead motors back from the grave, while his own life remained stalled in neutral. A widower raising his teenage daughter Sadie alone, Evan had learned to expect little beyond the next repair job and the promise of another quiet evening watching the sunset paint the harbour gold. Then Clara Sinclair arrived with her pristine yacht and her guarded secrets, asking him to fix an engine that shouldn't exist and that bore the fingerprints of technology he'd sworn he'd never see again. But what happens when the woman seeking refuge becomes the very person whose past destroyed everything he once held dear? The morning fog rolled off Millbrook Bay like a slow-breathing ghost, revealing the harbour one weathered plank at a time. Evan Callahan stood at the edge of his pier, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the daily resurrection of his world. The routine never changed. 6:30 sharp. He'd unlock the garage doors, flip the ancient radio to the marine weather report, and survey the boats that waited like faithful dogs for his attention. The harbour held 43 vessels on any given day, from lobster boats, scarred by decades of hard work, to pleasure craft owned by summer people who treated the water like their personal playground. Evan knew every engine's particular wheeze, every hull's unique complaint against the salt. His garage, inherited from his father and grandfather before him, squatted at the water's edge like a barnacle that had learned to love its rock. Behind him, the floorboards creaked with familiar footsteps. Sadie appeared in the doorway, 17 years old, and carrying herself like someone who'd learned early that the world demanded more than it gave. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, hung in careful waves that hid half her face. She clutched a sketchbook against her chest, its pages filled with meticulous drawings of boats, seabirds, and the endless dance between water and sky. "Dad, Mrs. Henderson wants to know if you can look at her outboard today. She says it's making that sound again." Evan smiled. Mrs. Henderson's 15-year-old Johnson made the same sound every Springer grinding protest that meant nothing more than old parts settling into another season. But she worried about it like a mother hen, and he'd learned that sometimes peace of mind was worth more than the $20 service call. "Tell her I'll swing by after lunch. What have you got there?" He nodded toward the sketchbook. Sadie's grip tightened, almost imperceptibly. Since her mother's death 3 years ago, she'd retreated into art the way others might retreat into prayer or drink. Her drawings captured details that escaped most people the way morning light caught the curve of a hull, how a pelican's shadow fell across rippling water, the patient dignity in an old fisherman's weathered hands. Just some studies, nothing important. Everything was important to Sadie, but she'd stopped believing anyone else would see it that way. The divorce from her mother had been brutal, full of accusations and lawyers who treated a teenager's preference like a commodity to be negotiated. When Sarah died in that car accident, the custody battle died with her, but the damage lingered like a scar that pulled tight in cold weather. "I'm heading to Morrison's to pick up parts. Want to come along?" She shook her head, already stepping back toward the house. "I've got that history paper to finish." Evan watched her go, noting the slight hunch of her shoulders that spoke of someone carrying invisible weight. Sarah had been the one who knew how to draw their daughter out, how to translate teenage moods into something resembling communication. Without her, he felt like a mechanic trying to repair an engine without understanding its language. The harbour began to stir with the day's first activities. Tommy Vasquez fired up his lobster boat, the diesel engine coughing to life, with a sound like an old man clearing his throat. The Clearwater, Captain Morrison's charter boat, bobbed gently at her mooring, waiting for the day's fishing party to arrive from Boston. Everything had its place, its purpose, its predictable rhythm. That's when he saw her. The yacht appeared through the dissipating fog like something from a different world. 50 feet of pristine white fiberglass and chrome, with lines so clean they seemed to cut through the water without disturbing it. She moved under sail power alone, her engine silent, guided by a single figure at the helm. Evan had seen plenty of expensive boats in his years working the harbour, but this one was different. The hull design suggested speed and efficiency that went beyond mere luxury. The electronics array bristled with equipment that belonged on military vessels, not pleasure craft. And the way she moved through the water too smooth, too quiet, as if she'd been designed to leave no trace of her passage. The woman steering wore a simple white shirt and navy pants, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Even from a distance, Evan could see the focused intensity in her posture, the way she handled the yacht with the confidence that came from real knowledge rather than casual weekend sailing. She brought the boat alongside the guest pier with a precision that spoke of countless hours at sea. Evan finished his coffee and headed down to the pier. Harbour courtesy demanded that he at least offer assistance, though something about the whole scene made him cautious. Summer people sometimes brought complaints about noise, demands for services the harbour couldn't provide, assumptions about what small-town life owed them. "Morning," he called, as the woman secured her lines. "Welcome to Millbrook Bay." She looked up, and Evan felt a small jolt of recognition that made no sense. Her face was elegant, but tired, with the kind of weariness that came from more than just a long passage. Her eyes were the colour of deep water, blue, green, and carefully guarded. "Thank you, I'm Clara Sinclair. I understand you're the harbour's mechanic?" Her voice carried the faintest trace of an accent, something that might have been European but had been softened by years of American living. She stepped onto the pier with the easy balance of someone who'd spent serious time on boats. But her hands were too soft for commercial fishing, too clean for engine work. "Evan Callahan, what can I do for you?" "I'm having engine trouble. Nothing catastrophic, but I'd rather not push my luck. Would you have time to take a look?" Evan nodded, though something in her tone suggested this was more than routine maintenance. "Sure, let me grab my tools." As he walked back to the garage, he found himself wondering about Clara Sinclair. The yacht flew a Massachusetts registration, but the wear patterns on her deck suggested she'd been living aboard for months, maybe longer. Her clothes were expensive but practical, chosen for durability rather than fashion. And there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Sadie, that careful distance that came from protecting secrets. He gathered his diagnostic equipment and headed back to the pier, where Clara waited beside her yacht. The morning sun had burned off the last of the fog, revealing the harbour in all its weathered glory. Lobster boats headed out for their first pull of the day, their wakes spreading in neat V's across the calm water. The scene was so familiar, so comfortingly routine, that it took Evan a moment to register what was different. Clara Sinclair didn't belong here. Not in the way that marked her as obviously foreign, but in the way that suggested she came from a world where problems were solved with money and influence rather than patience and ingenuity. Yet here she was, asking for help with the kind of straightforward competence that spoke of genuine need. "She's a beautiful boat," Evan said, stepping aboard. "Custom design?" "Something like that." Clara's answer came a beat too quick, a fraction too guarded. "The engine compartment is this way." She led him below, through a salon that managed to be both luxurious and utterly practical. The furnishings were expensive, but chosen for life at sea, everything secured, everything positioned for stability in rough weather. Charts covered the navigation table, marked with courses that suggested months of careful planning. The engine compartment was where things got interesting. Evan had worked on everything from ancient one-cylinder fishing boats to modern yachts, bristling with computer-controlled systems. He'd seen experimental engines, hybrid systems, even a few boats powered by hydrogen fuel cells. But Clara's engine was something else entirely. The basic configuration was familiar marine diesel, water-cooled, designed for long-distance cruising. But the modifications were extraordinary. The injection system had been completely rebuilt, with components that looked like they belonged in a laboratory. The cooling system incorporated materials he didn't recognize, arranged in patterns that suggested heat recovery and recycling far beyond normal marine applications. Most striking of all was the control system. Instead of the standard mechanical linkages and electronic sensors, Clara's engine was governed by a computer interface that looked like it had been borrowed from a spacecraft. The display showed operating parameters in real time, tracking efficiency ratios and performance metrics with scientific precision. "This is remarkable work," Evan said, running his hands over the modified components. "Who did the conversion?" Clara hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "A specialty shop in Newport. They do custom work for racing yachts." It was a reasonable answer, but something in her tone suggested it wasn't the complete truth. Racing yachts needed speed and reliability, but this engine was designed for something else: efficiency and stealth, the ability to run long distances without leaving the normal signatures of passage. "What kind of trouble are you having?" "Intermittent power loss. It runs fine for hours, then suddenly drops to maybe 60% output. The computer shows all systems normal, but I can feel the difference." Evan nodded, connecting his diagnostic equipment to the engine's computer interface. The readouts confirmed what Clara had described: all systems operating within normal parameters, but with subtle variations that suggested an underlying problem. He'd seen similar issues before, usually caused by fuel contamination or sensor malfunction. But as he dug deeper into the diagnostic data, he found something that made him pause. The engine's performance history showed operational patterns unlike anything he'd seen in recreational boating. Long passages at constant speed, minimal time in harbor, fuel consumption optimized for maximum range rather than comfort or convenience. This wasn't a pleasure yacht. It was a vessel designed for someone who needed to travel long distances without drawing attention, to operate independently for extended periods, to disappear into the vast anonymity of the ocean. "How long have you been aboard?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "A few months. I'm taking some time to explore the coast." Another reasonable answer that felt incomplete. Evan had met plenty of people taking extended cruises, but they usually traveled with companions, made friends in every harbor, collected stories and experiences like souvenirs. Clara Sinclair traveled alone, spoke carefully, and kept her business to herself. "I think I've found your problem," he said, pointing to a sensor reading on his diagnostic display. "One of your temperature sensors is giving intermittent readings. The computer thinks the engine is overheating and automatically reduces power. It's probably just a loose connection, but I'll need to trace the wiring to be sure." "How long will that take?" "A day, maybe 2. I'll need to order a replacement sensor if the wiring checks out fine." He saw something flicker across her face, not impatience, but concern. The kind of worry that came from needing to keep moving, from having reasons to avoid staying in one place too long. "Is that a problem?" he asked. "No, of course not. I appreciate your help." But as they climbed back up to the deck, Evan found himself wondering what Clara Sinclair was really running from, and why her yacht was equipped like a vessel designed to vanish without a trace. In his experience, people only invested in that kind of capability when they had serious reasons to disappear. The morning was fully established now, with the harbor busy with the day's activities. Clara stood at the rail, watching the lobster boats heading out to sea with an expression that mixed longing and caution. She looked like someone who understood the attraction of the horizon, but had learned to be careful about what might be following in her wake. "I'll get started on the diagnostics this afternoon," Evan said. "You're welcome to use the harbor facilities, shower, laundry, whatever you need." "Thank you. That's very kind." As he walked back toward his garage, Evan found himself thinking about the careful way Clara spoke, the practiced ease with which she deflected personal questions, the subtle modifications to her yacht that suggested preparation for extended solo voyaging. In his experience, people only lived that way when they had compelling reasons to stay mobile and anonymous. Behind him, he heard the faint sound of Sadie's voice as she emerged from the house to hang laundry on the line that stretched between 2 weathered posts. Clara turned at the sound, and Evan caught a glimpse of something unexpected in her expressione, a kind of gentle attention that suggested she understood something about teenagers that most adults missed. As he opened the garage doors and began setting up for the day's work, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that Clara Sinclair's arrival was going to change the careful equilibrium of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The harbour had seen plenty of visitors over the years, but few had brought the kind of watchful intensity that surrounded Clara like an invisible field. He'd learned, through bitter experience, to be cautious about complications. The custody battle had taught him that other people's problems had a way of becoming his own, and he'd built his life around routines that kept such entanglements at bay. But something about Clara Sinclair made him curious, despite his better judgment. Perhaps it was the way she'd handled her yacht, with the kind of competence that came from necessity rather than hobby. Or maybe it was the careful distance in her eyes, the same protective wariness he recognized in his own daughter. Whatever it was, Evan found himself looking forward to the diagnostic work with more interest than a simple sensor problem usually warranted. The morning stretched ahead, full of familiar tasks and predictable challenges. But for the first time in months, Evan felt the stirring of something he'd almost forgotten, the sense that his carefully ordered world might be about to become considerably more interesting. 2 days later, Evan was deep in the engine compartment of Clara's yacht when his fingers found something that shouldn't have been there. Tucked beneath a panel housing, the fuel injection system was a small plastic card, slightly yellowed with age and bearing the distinctive blue and silver logo of Meridian Energy Corporation. The factory ID badge showed a photograph of a younger man with Evan's same dark eyes and stubborn jaw. Thomas M. Callahan, employee, 4471, Manufacturing Division. The expiration date was 5 years old, exactly when Tommy had died in what the company called an industrial accident. Evan's hands began to shake as he stared at his brother's face. The badge felt impossibly heavy in his palm, a ghost made manifest in the confined space of the engine compartment. He'd thought he'd moved past the worst of the grief, had learned to live with the questions that would never be answered. But here was Tommy's ID badge, hidden in the yacht of a woman who claimed to know nothing about Meridian Energy. "Everything all right down there?" Clara's voice drifted down from the deck, casual and concerned. Evan slipped the badge into his pocket, his mind racing. How had Tommy's factory ID ended up in Clara's engine compartment? Had she known Tommy? Was she connected to Meridian Energy somehow? The questions multiplied like a spreading stain, darkening everything he thought he understood about Clara Sinclair. "Just found something interesting," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll be up in a minute." He forced himself to complete the sensor replacement, his hands moving through familiar motions while his thoughts churned. Tommy had been 28 when he died, working the night shift at Meridian's chemical processing plant outside Portland. The official report blamed operator error. Tommy had supposedly bypassed safety protocols and been overcome by hydrogen sulfide gas. The company had paid a modest settlement to avoid publicity, and the case had been closed within 6 months. But Evan had never believed the official story. Tommy had been safety-obsessed, the kind of worker who double-checked every procedure and never took shortcuts. He'd been working toward his supervisor certification, studying engineering manuals in his spare time, talking about making the plant safer for everyone. The idea that he'd deliberately circumvented safety systems was absurd. Evan climbed back up to the deck, where Clara was sitting in the cockpit with a cup of coffee and a tablet computer. She looked up as he emerged, and he caught something in her expression, a flicker of watchfulness that seemed at odds with her casual demeanor. "How's the repair coming?" "Sensors replaced. I need to run some tests to make sure everything's calibrated properly." He settled into the seat across from her, studying her face. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate a straight answer." Her body language shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle tensing that suggested she was preparing for something she'd been expecting. "Of course." Evan pulled the ID badge from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. Clara's face went completely still, the color draining from her cheeks. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "That's my brother," Evan said quietly. "He died 5 years ago, in an accident at Meridian Energy." His name was Tommy Callahan, and according to the company, he made a mistake that cost him his life. What I want to know is why his ID badge was hidden in your engine compartment. Clara stared at the badge as if it were a snake coiled to strike. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a depth of pain that matched his own. I was hoping you'd never have to know about this. Know about what? Clara was quiet for so long that Evan began to wonder if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Tommy didn't make a mistake. He was murdered. The words hit Evan like a physical blow. He'd suspected, had lived with nagging doubts for 5 years, but hearing it stated so boldly made the harbor seem to tilt around him. How do you know that? Because I'm the reason he's dead. Clara stood abruptly and walked to the rail, her back to him. Evan could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that was barely holding her together. My name is Clara Sinclair now, but 5 years ago, I was Dr. Clara Hoffman, Chief Innovation Officer for Meridian Energy Corporation. I developed the chemical processing system that your brother was working on when he died. Evan felt something cold and sharp unfold in his chest. The woman he'd been growing to respect, maybe even care about, was connected to the company that had killed Tommy. More than connected, she'd helped design the system that had taken his brother's life. You worked for Meridian. I worked for them, and I believed in what we were doing. Clean energy, environmental responsibility, all the buzzwords that made it easy to ignore the corners we were cutting. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Your brother discovered that the safety protocols I'd designed were being deliberately circumvented to increase production speed. He was going to report it. So they killed him. They made it look like an accident. But Tommy had been asking questions, pushing for investigations. He'd found evidence that the company was falsifying safety data, exposing workers to dangerous chemicals to meet production quotas. Clara's voice grew stronger, more controlled. He was going to blow the whistle, so they silenced him and made it look like his own carelessness. Evan stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling him. Tommy hadn't just died in an accident, they'd been murdered for trying to protect other workers. And the woman sitting across from him had been part of the system that killed him. Why should I believe you? Because I have proof. Clara disappeared below deck and returned with a laptop computer. After Tommy died, I started investigating. What I found made me realize that Meridian wasn't just cutting corners, they were systematically covering up industrial accidents, bribing inspectors, falsifying environmental data. They were a criminal organization masquerading as an energy company. She opened the laptop and showed him a screen full of documents and technical diagrams. Even from a distance, Evan could see references to chemical processing systems, safety protocols, and incident reports. I spent 2 years gathering evidence, trying to build a case that would hold up in court. But the more I learned, the more dangerous it became. Meridian has connections everywhere. Regulatory agencies, law enforcement, even federal oversight committees. When I finally tried to go public, they destroyed my career and put a target on my back. So, you ran. I ran, and I've been running ever since. The yacht, the false identity, the constant move-in, it's all to stay one step ahead of people who would rather see me dead than have the truth come out. Evan looked down at Tommy's ID badge, trying to reconcile this new information with everything he thought he knew. His brother hadn't died because of his own mistake. He'd died because he'd tried to do the right thing. And Clara wasn't just a mysterious woman seeking refuge, was a whistleblower carrying evidence that could bring down the company responsible for Tommy's death. Why do you have his badge? I took it from his locker after the funeral, along with his safety reports, his correspondence with supervisors, anything that might serve as evidence someday. Clara's voice broke slightly. I'd been carrying pieces of your brother with me for 5 years, waiting for the chance to get justice for him and all the others. Others? Tommy wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last. Meridian has been covering up worker deaths for decades. I have documentation of at least 30 cases where employees died under suspicious circumstances after raising safety concerns. Evan felt a surge of rage so intense it made his vision blur. 30 people, 30 families destroyed by corporate greed and systematic murder. Tommy had been just one name on a list of inconvenient employees who'd been silenced to protect profit margins. Why come here? Why risk exposing yourself? Clara gestured toward the engine compartment. Because I finally have what I need to destroy them. The engine modifications you've been working on, they're not just for efficiency. I've been using this yacht to gather evidence from Meridian facilities all along the coast. Environmental sampling, surveillance footage, intercepted communications. Everything I need to prove their crimes. And they know you're getting close. The engine problems weren't mechanical failure. They were sabotage. Meridian's security people found me in Bar Harbor 2 weeks ago and tried to disable the yacht. I managed to get away, but the damage forced me to seek repairs. Evan looked at Clara with new understanding. She wasn't just running from corporate lawyers or investigators. She was being hunted by people who'd already killed to protect their secrets. Coming to Millbrook Bay had been an act of desperation, not choice. What happens now? I finish uploading the evidence to secure servers, then disappear again. Find a new identity, a new boat, keep moving until I can find someone in law enforcement who isn't on Meridian's payroll. And Tommy's murderers go free. For now. But eventually, the evidence will surface. Someone will investigate. Justice will come, even if it takes years. Evan stood up, Tommy's ID badge clenched in his fist. 5 years of unanswered questions, 5 years of grief and doubt and carefully suppressed rage, all crystallizing into a moment of perfect clarity. No. Clara looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. No more running, no more waiting for someone else to care enough to investigate. If you have evidence that can bring down the people who killed my brother, then we're going to make sure it sees the light of day. Evan, you don't understand what you're suggesting. These people have unlimited resources, no moral constraints, and a proven willingness to kill. If you help me, you're putting yourself and Sadie in mortal danger. They already put us in danger when they murdered Tommy. The only question is whether we're going to let them get away with it. Clara studied his face, and he could see her weighing risks and possibilities. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of hope that hadn't been there before. If we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no mistakes. We get all the evidence uploaded and distributed to every major news organization and law enforcement agency simultaneously. Create too much exposure for them to contain. Evan nodded. What do you need? Time, secure internet access, and a way to transmit several terabytes of data without Meridian's security people tracking the source. How long? 48 hours, maybe less, if everything goes smoothly. Evan looked out across the harbor, where his neighbors were going about their daily routines in blissful ignorance of the corporate conspiracy that had reached into their quiet community. Tomorrow, Sadie would be getting ready for school, Mrs. Henderson would be worrying about her outboard motor, and the lobster boats would be heading out for another day's work. But Tommy would still be dead, and his murderers would still be free. 48 hours, Evan said, but we do this together, and we make sure every last one of those bastards pays for what they've done. Clara smiled for the first time since he'd found the ID badge, and in that smile he saw something that reminded him why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. Beneath the careful, guarded exterior was someone who'd sacrificed everything for the sake of truth and justice. Someone worth fighting alongside, no matter what the cost. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant across the harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. To anyone watching from shore, they looked like two people enjoying a quiet conversation on a beautiful yacht. No one could have guessed that they were planning to bring down one of the most powerful corporations in America, and that the ghost of Tommy Callahan was finally going to get the justice he'd died trying to achieve. That evening, Evan sat at his kitchen table with a beer growing warm in his hands, staring at a corporate newsletter he'd never seen before. Clara had given it to him after their confrontation on the yacht, along with a manila folder containing what she called background materials. The newsletter was 5 years old, its glossy pages celebrating Meridian Energy's innovative leadership team. On page 3 was a photograph that made his stomach clench. Dr. Clara Hoffman stood behind a podium at some corporate event, accepting an award for environmental innovation excellence. She looked younger, more polished, her smile bright with the confidence of someone who believed she was making the world a better place. The caption identified her as Chief Innovation Officer and praised her groundbreaking work in sustainable chemical processing. The woman in the photograph bore little resemblance to the guarded, haunted person he'd come to know as Clara Sinclair. Success had been stripped away, replaced by the hard wisdom that came from learning how easily good intentions could be corrupted. "Dad," Sadie's voice startled him from his brooding. She stood in the kitchen doorway, studying him with the penetrating gaze she'd inherited from her mother. "You look like someone died." The words hit closer to home than she could know. Someone had died. Tommy had been murdered by the very people Clara had once worked for. And now, Evan was contemplating actions that could put his daughter in the same kind of danger. "Just thinking about work stuff. How's the history paper coming?" Sadie slid into the chair across from him, her artist's eye taking in details he wished he could hide. She'd always been perceptive, but losing her mother had sharpened that awareness into something almost uncomfortable. She could read his moods like weather patterns, sensing storms before they broke. "It's finished. Dad, who's the woman on the yacht?" Evan closed the newsletter carefully. "A customer. Engine trouble. She's been watching me." "What do you mean?" "When I'm hanging laundry or working in the garden, I can feel her looking. Not creepy looking, just paying attention. Like she's trying to figure something out." Sadie traced patterns on the table with her finger, a nervous habit that emerged when she was processing difficult thoughts. "She reminds me of Mom sometimes. The way she holds herself, like she's carrying something heavy." The observation was more accurate than Sadie could know. Clara was carrying something heavy, the weight of evidence that could destroy lives, and the knowledge that her past work had contributed to deaths like Tommy's. But she was also carrying something else, something Evan was only beginning to understand. Hope. Despite everything she'd lost, despite the constant danger and the years of running, Clara still believed that justice was possible, that the truth mattered enough to risk everything for. "Maybe you could talk to her," Evan said carefully. "She might appreciate the company." Sadie's eyebrows rose. "You want me to talk to a stranger, Mr. Don't get involved with other people's problems?" Evan felt heat creep up his neck. Since the custody battle and Sarah's death, he'd been protective to the point of paranoia, building walls around their small family that kept complications at bay. But Clara's situation was different. It was connected to Tommy's death, to questions that had haunted him for 5 years. "She's not really a stranger anymore, and she might be staying for a few days while I finish the repairs." "Uh-huh." Sadie's tone suggested she wasn't buying his casual explanation. "Dad, what's really going on? You've been weird ever since she showed up, and now you're encouraging me to make friends with yacht people? That's not exactly your style." Before Evan could answer, a knock came at the front door. Through the window, he could see Clara standing on the porch, her posture apologetic but determined. She'd changed from her sailing clothes into a simple dress that made her look less like a fugitive and more like someone seeking ordinary human connection. Evan opened the door, acutely aware of Sadie watching from the kitchen doorway. "I'm sorry to bother you at home," Clara said, "but I wanted to return this." She held out a wrench he'd left aboard her yacht. "And I was hoping we could talk a bit more about the timeline." "Come in." Evan stepped aside, noting how Clara's eyes immediately found Sadie. "Clara, this is my daughter Sadie. Sadie, Clara Sinclair." "It's nice to meet you," Clara said, and something in her voice suggested she genuinely meant it. "Your father's been very helpful with my boat troubles." Sadie stepped forward with the careful politeness she reserved for adults she wasn't sure about. "Are you staying in the harbor long?" "A few days, I hope. Though I have to say, your town is beautiful. I've been admiring the view from the yacht There's something about the way the light hits the water in the late afternoon that's just magical. The golden hour, Sadie said, her reserve softening slightly. It's my favorite time to draw. You're an artist? Sort of. I mean, I draw and paint sometimes, nothing serious. Clara's smile was warm and genuine. I'd love to see your work sometime if you wouldn't mind sharing. I have a great appreciation for people who can capture the beauty of the sea. Evan watched this exchange with growing unease. Clara was being friendly, but there was something calculated about it, as if she was deliberately drawing Sadie into their orbit. Given what they were planning to do, involving his daughter even peripherally felt dangerous. Clara, maybe we should discuss those timeline issues, he said. Of course. Clara turned back to Sadie. It was lovely meeting you. I hope we'll have a chance to talk again. Evan led Clara to his small home office, closing the door behind them. The room was cramped and functional, dominated by a desk covered in boat repair manuals and a computer he used mainly for ordering parts. You can't involve Sadie in this, he said without preamble. I'm not trying to involve her, but if we're going to work together for the next few days, it might help if she doesn't see me as a complete outsider. Teenagers notice things, ask questions. A little friendly conversation now might prevent complications later. Evan conceded the point reluctantly. Clara was right. Sadie had already noticed her presence and would certainly pick up on any tension or secrecy. Better to establish a plausible reason for Clara to be around. What did you mean by timeline issues? Clara pulled a smartphone from her pocket and showed him a screen full of technical data. I've been monitoring Meridian's internal communications. They know I'm somewhere along the Maine coast, and they're narrowing the search. I probably have less time than I thought. How much less? Maybe 24 hours before they trace my location. After that, staying in one place becomes impossible. Evan studied the data on her phone, most of which was incomprehensible to him but clearly significant to Clara. What do you need from me? Access to high-speed internet that can't be traced back to this location. The harbor probably has Wi-Fi, but it won't be fast enough for what I need to upload. Is there anywhere in town with fiber optic access? The library has it, and the high school computer lab. Evan thought for a moment. The library would be saferless traffic, older staff who don't pay much attention to what people are doing online. Can you get me access after hours? I need to upload several terabytes of data, which could take most of the night. Margaret Chen runs the library. She's been there for 20 years, and she's a friend. I could probably convince her to let us use the building tonight, especially if I tell her it's for boat registration paperwork or something equally boring. Clara nodded. That could work. What about security, cameras, alarm systems? Basic stuff. Margaret usually disables the alarms when she stays late, and the cameras are mainly focused on the entrance and checkout desk. We'd be using the computer lab in the back. Good. The upload process is mostly automated once I get it started, but I need to monitor for interruptions. If Meridian's security people detect what I'm doing, they'll try to interfere electronically before they resort to physical intervention. Evan felt a chill at the casual way Clara discussed electronic warfare and physical threats. His world of mechanical problems and straightforward solutions seemed impossibly naive compared to the shadow war she'd been fighting. Clara, are you sure this is going to work? Really sure? Because if we fail, if they catch us, then we'll have tried. That's more than anyone else has been willing to do. Clara's voice carried a quiet intensity that reminded him of Tommy in his most determined moments. Your brother died trying to protect people. I've spent 5 years gathering evidence to honor that sacrifice. Tomorrow night, we finally get the chance to make it count. A soft knock interrupted them. Sadie's voice came through the door. Dad? Mrs. Chen called. She wants to know if you can look at the library's heating system tomorrow night. Says it's making funny noises. Evan and Clara exchanged glances. Margaret Chen's timing was either providential or suspicious. Tell her I'll be there around 8, Evan called back. She says to bring your tools and plan on staying late. Sounds like it might be complicated. When Sadie's footsteps retreated, Clara smiled grimly. Your daughter has interesting timing. Margaret's been having trouble with that heating system for months. The timing is pure coincidence. But even as he said it, Evan felt the universe aligning in ways that seemed almost too convenient. Unless what? Unless someone suggested to Margaret that now would be a good time to have her heating system checked. Clara's expression grew thoughtful. You think someone knows what we're planning? I think small towns have ways of taking care of their own that outsiders don't always understand. Margaret's husband died in a factory accident 15 years ago. Different company, similar circumstances. If she suspected we were going after corporate killers, she might be inclined to help. Even if it put her at risk? Especially if it put her at risk. Margaret doesn't scare easily, and she has a long memory for injustice. Clara was quiet for a moment, processing this new variable in their plans. If you're right, if she's deliberately providing us with access, then we need to be extra careful not to involve her directly. The last thing I want is to put another innocent person in danger. Margaret Chen hasn't been innocent of anything since 1987. She'll take care of herself. Through the office window, Evan could see the harbor settling into evening routines. Boats returning from day trips, charter customers heading back to their hotels, the first lights beginning to twinkle in windows along the waterfront. It was a scene of comfortable normalcy that would probably be shattered forever if their plan succeeded. Tomorrow night, they would either strike a blow for justice that had been 5 years in the making, or they would trigger a corporate response that could destroy everything he'd built in Millbrook Bay. There was no middle ground, no way to test the waters or retreat if things went wrong. One more thing, Clara said. If something happens to May, Meridian's people find us before we can complete the upload. I need you to promise me something. What? Take the evidence and run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to save me. Just get the data to someone who can use it, even if it takes years. Evan looked at her steady gaze, seeing the same determination that had driven Tommy to risk his life for the safety of other workers. I promise, but it won't come to that. I hope you're right. As Clara prepared to leave, Evan felt the weight of commitment settling over him like a physical presence. Tomorrow night would change everything for better or worse. There would be no going back to the careful, controlled life he'd built around his grief. But for the first time since Tommy's death, he felt like he was moving towards something instead of just away from the past. Justice might be a fragile hope, but it was better than the hollow acceptance he'd been living with. Outside, the harbor lights reflected off the calm water like scattered stars, and Clara's yacht sat quietly at the guest pier, holding secrets that could topple an empire. Tomorrow, those secrets would finally see the light of day. The next morning brought low-hanging clouds and the kind of steady drizzle that made the harbor look like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Evan found Clara sitting in the diner that occupied the ground floor of the old Seaman's Hotel, hunched over a laptop computer and a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. She looked up as he approached, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Dark circles suggested she'd spent most of the night working, and her normally careful composure had frayed around the edges. "Rough night?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from her. "I've been reviewing the environmental impact report I smuggled out of Meridian 5 years ago, making sure I have all the documentation properly organized for tonight's upload." She gestured at the laptop screen, which showed a complex file structure filled with folders labeled with dates, locations, and ominous-sounding chemical names. "I wanted to be certain I hadn't missed anything important." Evan could see enough of the screen to understand that Clara's evidence went far beyond Tommy's death. Chemical spill reports, wildlife mortality studies, groundwater contamination analyses, Meridian's criminal negligence stretched across decades and multiple states. "How many people are we talking about?" he asked quietly. "Directly? At least 47 confirmed deaths, maybe twice that number, if you include long-term health effects from environmental exposure." Clara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. "Indirectly, thousands, maybe tens of thousands." The magnitude of it was overwhelming. Evan had focused his anger on Tommy's death, but Clara had been carrying evidence of systematic mass murder for 5 years. No wonder she looked haunted. How do you live with knowing all that? By remembering that knowledge without action is just another form of complicity. Clara closed the laptop and leaned back in the booth. Your brother understood that. It's why he was willing to risk everything to expose what was happening at the plant. Through the diner's rain-streaked windows, Evan could see the harbor going about its morning business despite the weather. Lobster boats heading out to pull traps, the mail boat preparing for its run to the outer islands, tourists in yellow slickers browsing the shops along the waterfront. Normal life, blissfully unaware of the corporate conspiracy that had reached into their quiet community. I've been thinking about what happens after tonight, Evan said. Assuming everything goes according to plan and the evidence gets uploaded successfully, what then? Then Meridian's lawyers and PR people go into crisis mode. They'll try to discredit the evidence, claim it's fabricated or taken out of context. They'll attack my credibility, paint me as a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind, the usual corporate playbook. Will it work? Maybe, for a while. But the evidence is too extensive, too well documented. Eventually, the truth will be impossible to ignore. Clara's expression grew thoughtful. The key is making sure the story gets picked up by enough different outlets that Meridian can't contain it. Once it reaches critical mass, their damage control efforts will just make them look more guilty. And what happens to you? I disappear again. New identity, new boat, new life somewhere. Meridian's security people can't reach me. She paused, studying his face. What happens to you is the bigger question. Once this goes public, they'll investigate everyone who helped me. Your name will come up. Evan had been trying not to think about that particular complication. His involvement in Clara's plan would eventually be discovered, and Meridian had demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats permanently. But the alternative, letting Tommy's murderers escape justice, was unacceptable. Let me worry about that. I am worried about it. And about Sadie. She's going to be at risk too, just by association. The mention of his daughter sent a cold spike of fear through Evan's chest. He'd been so focused on getting justice for Tommy that he'd barely considered the long-term consequences for Sadie. If Meridian decided to retaliate against him, she would become a target by default. Maybe I should send her to stay with her aunt in Boston for a while. That might be wise, at least until we know how Meridian responds to the evidence release. Before Evan could reply, the diner's door chimed and Sadie walked in, shaking rain from her jacket. She spotted them immediately and approached with the kind of purposeful stride that usually meant she had something on her mind. Hey, Dad. Clara. She slid into the booth next to Evan, her artist's eye taking in Clara's exhausted appearance and the tension crackling between the adults. You guys look like you're planning a revolution or something. The observation was uncomfortably close to the truth. Evan exchanged a quick glance with Clara, who managed a tired smile. Just discussing boat repairs, Clara said. Your father's been very helpful with my engine problems. Uh-huh. Sadie's tone suggested she wasn't buying the innocent explanation. Dad, Mrs. Chen stopped by the house looking for you. She seemed kind of nervous about something. Did she say what she wanted? Just that she needs to talk to you before tonight. Something about the heating system being more complicated than she thought. Sadie's gaze shifted between Evan and Clara. She also asked if I was planning to stay home tonight, or if I might want to visit Aunt Linda for a few days. Evan felt his stomach drop. Margaret Chen was being far from subtle about her suspicions and her desire to get Sadie out of potential danger, which meant their plan was probably an open secret among certain members of the community. Maybe visiting Aunt Linda isn't a bad idea, he said carefully. You haven't seen her in months. Right, because suddenly you're encouraging family visits. Sadie's voice carried the exasperated tone of a teenager dealing with transparently manipulative adults. Dad, whatever's going on, I'd rather know about it than be shipped off to Boston like some kind of fragile flower. Clara leaned forward, her expression serious. Sadie, sometimes adults have to deal with situations that are genuinely dangerous. Not because we think young people can't handle the truth, but because we want to protect the people we care about. What kind of dangerous? Evan and Clara exchanged another glance. There was no good way to explain corporate assassination plots to a 17-year-old, especially one who'd already lost her mother to unexpected tragedy. "The kind where it's better to be safe than sorry," Evan said finally. "I need you to trust me on this." Sadie studied both their faces, her artist's eye reading nuances that most people would miss. When she finally spoke, her voice was resigned but determined. "Fine, I'll go to Aunt Linda's, but only if you promise to tell me everything once it's over." "Deal. And if you're not back by Sunday, I'm calling the police." "That won't be necessary." "It better not be." Sadie stood up, then turned to Clara. "Whatever my dad's getting himself into, I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I," Clara said quietly. After Sadie left, Clara and Evan sat in uncomfortable silence. The diner's background, noise clinking dishes, muted conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine seemed amplified in the absence of their own words. "She's smart," Clara said eventually. "Too smart for her own good sometimes. She reminds me of myself at that age, observant, skeptical of adult explanations, determined to understand the world on her own terms." Clara's expression grew wistful. "I had planned to be a teacher originally, before I got seduced by corporate research budgets and the promise of making a real difference through technology. You still made a difference, just not the way you expected. I enabled the murder of dozens of people, including your brother. That's not exactly the legacy I was hoping for." Evan could hear the self-recrimination in her voice, the weight of guilt she'd been carrying for 5 years. But he could also see the determination that had kept her fighting despite the personal cost. Tommy knew the risks when he decided to blow the whistle. He made that choice because he believed some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant putting himself in danger. Evan met Clara's eyes across the table. "You've been fighting the same fight ever since. That's exactly the legacy he would have wanted." Clara was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier. "Tonight, we finish what he started." "Tonight, we finish what he started," Evan agreed. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the harbor clean and preparing the stage for whatever tomorrow would bring. In a few hours, they would either strike the blow for justice that Tommy had died trying to deliver, or they would become the latest casualties in Meridian Energy's war against the truth. But for the first time since Clara had arrived in Millbrook Bay, Evan felt like they had a real chance of winning. The evidence was comprehensive, the plan was solid, and they had the tacit support of a community that understood the difference between right and wrong. Most importantly, they had each other, two people who'd found common cause in the pursuit of justice for the dead. As Clara gathered her things and prepared to return to her yacht, Evan made a silent promise to his brother's memory. Tonight, Tommy Callahan would finally get the justice he'd died trying to achieve, and Meridian Energy would finally face the consequences of their crimes. That afternoon, Clara sat cross-legged on her yacht's deck with a small encrypted USB drive in her palm, its innocent appearance belying the explosive contents hidden within. The device contained the most damning evidence she'd collected against Meridian Energy, detailed records of industrial accidents that had been systematically covered up, including a complete file on Tommy Callahan's death. She'd carried this particular drive for 2 years, adding to it whenever she could safely access Meridian's internal servers. The data it contained would destroy careers, topple executives, and send dozens of people to prison. But looking at it now, she felt only a bone-deep weariness at the thought of the battles that would follow its release. "Heavy thoughts?" Evan's voice came from the pier below. Clara looked up to find him standing beside her yacht with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His face carried the same mix of determination and apprehension she'd been feeling all day. "Just reviewing the evidence one more time, making sure I haven't missed anything crucial." She held up the USB drive. "This little thing contains enough information to bring down Meridian's entire executive structure. Bank records, email communications, internal memos, everything we need to prove their criminal conspiracy." Evan stepped aboard and settled into the cockpit across from her, including Tommy's case. Especially Tommy's case. I have recordings of the meetings where they decided he was becoming too much of a liability. The actual orders to stage his accident. Even the payments made to the coroner who falsified the autopsy report. The words hung in the salt air like a curse. Evan's hands clenched involuntarily as he processed the magnitude of the conspiracy that had claimed his brother's life. It was one thing to suspect corporate cover-up. It was another to hear that Tommy's murder had been planned in boardroom meetings and executed with bureaucratic efficiency. How did you get recordings of internal meetings? I was Chief Innovation Officer for 3 years. I had access to everything: security systems, communication networks, executive conference rooms. When I started suspecting something was wrong, I began documenting everything I could. Clara's voice grew distant, lost in memories of corporate betrayal. At first, I thought I was gathering evidence to reform the company from within. By the time I realized how deep the corruption went, I was already in too deep to get out safely. She opened her laptop and showed him a file structure that resembled a prosecutor's case database. Hundreds of documents organized by date, location, and type of crime. Audio files, video surveillance, financial records, and scientific reports. 5 years of meticulous investigation compressed into digital evidence that could topple a corporate empire. This goes far beyond industrial accidents, Clara continued, scrolling through the files. Environmental contamination, bribery of government officials, systematic destruction of communities that tried to resist their operations. Meridian isn't just an energy company, they're a criminal organization that happens to generate electricity. Evan studied the screen, trying to comprehend the scope of institutional evil Clara had uncovered. Tommy's death was horrific, but it was just one incident in a pattern of systematic murder and environmental destruction that stretched back decades. How many other people know about this? Just me, until now. I've been operating alone since I left Meridian, partly for security reasons and partly because I didn't know who could be trusted. Corporate influence reaches into law enforcement, regulatory agencies, even environmental organizations that should have been fighting them. The isolation in Clara's voice was palpable. 5 years of carrying this burden alone, living in constant fear, watching from the shadows as Meridian continued to destroy lives and communities. No wonder she looked haunted. What made you finally decide to go public? 2 things. First, I intercepted communications suggesting they're planning to expand operations into pristine wilderness areas in Alaska. Millions of acres that would be permanently destroyed if they're allowed to proceed. Clara's finger traced patterns on the laptop's edge, a nervous gesture that spoke of barely controlled emotion. Second, they're getting close to finding me. My electronic security measures are sophisticated, but they have unlimited resources and government connections. It's only a matter of time before they track me down. So, this is your last chance. This is everyone's last chance. If I don't get this evidence released now, while I still have the technical capability and secure access, it may never see the light of day. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the harbor, and both of them looked up at the darkening sky. The earlier drizzle had given way to more serious weather, with storm clouds building over the ocean like an advancing army. Appropriate timing, Clara said with grim humor. Seems fitting that we're doing this during a storm. Actually, the storm might help us. Fewer people out and about, less chance of being observed. Evan checked his watch. I should head over to the library soon. Margaret will be expecting me. Evan, before you go, I need you to understand something about tonight. Once we start the upload process, there's no way to stop it. The evidence will be distributed to news organizations, law enforcement agencies, and government oversight committees simultaneously. Meridian's response will be swift and probably violent. Meaning what exactly? Meaning they'll do everything in their power to identify and eliminate everyone involved in the data release. We're not just exposing corporate crimes, we're threatening the livelihood and freedom of some very powerful people who have demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their interests. Evan nodded grimly. He'd understood the risks intellectually, but hearing Clara spell them out so bluntly made the danger feel immediate and personal. Are you having second thoughts? About the mission? No. About involving you? Every minute. Clara's eyes held a depth of concern that went beyond professional caution. You have a daughter to think about, a life you've built here. I've already lost everything, family, career, any hope of a normal future, but you still have something to lose. I lost my brother to these people. That's not something I can just forget or move past. Evan met her gaze steadily. Besides, you haven't lost everything. You still have your integrity, your commitment to justice. That's more than most people can say. Clara was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. When this is over, assuming we both survive, what happens then? It was a question Evan had been trying not to think about. In the immediate aftermath of the evidence release, Clara would need to disappear again, assume a new identity, start over somewhere. Meridian couldn't reach her. And he would be left in Millbrook Bay, dealing with whatever retaliation the corporation chose to unleash. I guess we'll figure that out when we get there. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I've got right now, one crisis at a time. Clara smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he'd seen from her all day. Your brother would have said something similar. He had the same stubborn refusal to be intimidated by overwhelming odds. Tommy always said that doing the right thing was usually simpler, it was doing the easy thing that got complicated. Smart man. I wish I'd had the chance to know him better. As if summoned by their conversation, a memory surfaced in Evan's mind. Tommy standing in this same harbor 3 years before his death, watching the sunset paint the water gold. He'd been talking about his job at Meridian, expressing concerns about safety shortcuts and environmental violations. Even then, he'd been gathering courage for the confrontation that would ultimately cost him his life. You would have liked him, Evan said. He believed in the same things you do, that people in power have a responsibility to protect those who can't protect themselves, and that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to risk everything in opposition to it. Thunder rumbled again, closer this time, and the first fat raindrops began spattering the yacht's deck. Clara gathered her laptop and the USB drive, preparing to move the operation below deck. 6 hours, she said. In 6 hours, we'll either be heroes or fugitives. Or both. Probably both. As Evan prepared to leave for his appointment with Margaret Chen, he felt the weight of history settling around him like a physical presence. Tonight, they would either strike the blow for justice that Tommy had died trying to deliver, or they would become the latest casualties in a war between truth and power that had been raging long before they'd joined the fight. But looking at Clara's determined expression as she secured her evidence for the final operation, Evan felt something he hadn't experienced since his brother's death, the sense that he was finally moving in the right direction, finally taking action that would honor Tommy's sacrifice. The storm was building over Millbrook Bay, bringing with it the kind of transformative weather that could wash away old certainties and make space for new possibilities. By morning, nothing would be the same. And for the first time in 5 years, that prospect filled Evan with hope rather than dread. The Millbrook Bay Library stood dark against the storm-swept evening, its colonial brick facade streaming with rain. Evan pulled into the small parking lot behind the building, where Margaret Chen's ancient Honda Civic sat like a faithful sentinel beside the employee entrance. Through the rear windows, he could see the glow of computer screens in the reference section. He knocked softly on the back door, a pattern Margaret had taught him years ago when he'd helped her with after-hours maintenance projects. The door opened immediately, revealing Margaret's weathered face and knowing eyes. Evan, right on time. She stepped aside to let him enter, her gaze taking in the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. I assume you brought more than heating tools tonight. How much do you know, Margaret? Enough to understand that justice sometimes requires bending a few rules. She led him through the darkened stacks toward the computer lab, her footsteps sure despite the limited lighting. My Robert died in a factory accident, that wasn't really an accident. Different company, similar circumstances. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to hold these corporate murderers accountable. The computer lab occupied the library's rear section, a modern addition that contrasted sharply with the building's historical character. 6 high-end workstations sat arranged in a semicircle, their large monitors dark but ready. Margaret had disabled the security cameras and motion sensors, creating a pocket of invisibility within the building's surveillance network. The fiber connection runs directly to the university server farm in Portland, Margaret explained, gesturing toward a workstation positioned away from the windows. Speed tests show consistent upload rates of about 2 gigabits per second, should be more than adequate for whatever you need to transmit. Evan stared at her, amazed by the casual efficiency with which she'd prepared for their operation. Margaret, you could lose your job for this. Maybe face criminal charges. At my age, job security isn't my primary concern. And as for criminal charges, well, sometimes civil disobedience is the only way to achieve civil justice. She handed him a set of keys. Lock up when you're finished. The security system will remain disabled until morning. What if someone asks why you were here so late? I'll tell them I was working on the quarterly budget reports. Boring enough that no one will ask for details. Margaret's smile held decades of accumulated wisdom about small-town politics and plausible deniability. Besides, in a place like Millbrook Bay, people mind their own business until it becomes everyone's business. After Margaret left, Evan waited in the darkened library for Clara's arrival. The storm had intensified, with wind-driven rain lashing the windows and thunder rolling across the harbor like artillery fire. Weather reports called for the system to peak around midnight, perfect cover for their clandestine activities. Clara appeared at the rear entrance precisely at 9 o'clock, moving through the storm like a shadow given substance. She carried a waterproof case containing her laptop and the encrypted drives, her movements economical and purposeful despite the driving rain. "Any problems?" Evan asked as he let her in. "None so far, though I'm monitoring several concerning indicators in Meridian's communication traffic. They're definitely mobilizing resources to track me down." "How long do we have?" "Hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. But their search pattern is tightening." Clara followed him to the computer lab, her eyes automatically cataloging escape routes and potential defensive positions. The good news is that once the upload starts, they'll need time to trace the transmission source. The bad news is that they'll probably figure out it's coming from this area. She opened her laptop and began connecting it to the library's high-speed network, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. Multiple windows cascaded across the screen file, transfer protocols, security monitors, communication channels that would simultaneously broadcast the evidence to news organizations and law enforcement agencies around the world. "This is it," Clara said quietly. "Once I initiate the upload sequence, there's no stopping it. The evidence will propagate through multiple servers, creating redundant copies that can't be suppressed or destroyed." Evan watched the preparation process with growing tension. The stakes had never felt more real than they did now, sitting in the quiet library while Clara prepared to trigger a corporate earthquake that would ripple around the globe. "Tell me about the resignation letter," he said, needing to hear her voice, to maintain human connection in the face of overwhelming technological complexity. Clara's hands paused on the keyboard. "What resignation letter?" "The one you wrote to Meridian's board 5 years ago. I saw it referenced in your files." "Ah, that." Clara's expression grew distant, lost in memories of corporate idealism turned to bitter disillusionment. "I actually wrote it before I knew about the murders. Back when I thought the problems were just standard corporate corner-cutting that could be fixed through proper channels." "What did it say?" "Everything I believed about corporate responsibility and environmental stewardship. Everything I thought Meridian stood for when I joined them." Clara's voice carried the weight of profound disappointment. "I outlined my concerns about safety protocols, environmental impact assessments, worker protection standards. I actually believed the board would thank me for bringing these issues to their attention. What happened when you submitted it? They promoted me, gave me a raise, a bigger office, and more stock options. Then they buried the letter and continued with business as usual. Clara resumed her keyboard work, but Evan could see the tension in her shoulders. That's when I realized that my concerns weren't being ignored through bureaucratic incompetence. They were being ignored because the board already knew about the problems and had chosen to prioritize profits over human lives. So you started gathering evidence. So I started paying attention, really paying attention, not just to my own department, but to the entire corporate structure. What I found was a systematic pattern of criminal negligence that went back decades. The laptop chimed softly, indicating that the secure connection was established. Clara's files began appearing on the library workstation, terabytes of evidence ready for global distribution. Your brother's death was the turning point for me, Clara continued, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. When I saw the internal communications about staging his accident, when I realized that a good man had died simply for trying to protect his co-workers, that's when I understood that reform from within was impossible. That's when you decided to become a whistleblower. That's when I decided to become a weapon. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Clara Sinclair, who had once believed in corporate responsibility and environmental stewardship, had been transformed by institutional betrayal into something far more dangerous, a person with nothing left to lose and the technical skills to inflict maximum damage on her former employers. "Are you ready?" she asked, her finger hovering over the enter key. Evan thought about Tommy, working late shifts at the chemical plant while studying for his supervisor certification, about all the workers who had died in accidents that weren't really accidents, about communities poisoned by environmental contamination that had been covered up for decades. "Do it." Clara pressed enter. The screen exploded into activity as files began uploading to servers around the world. Progress bars crept steadily forward, each percentage point representing another piece of evidence that would help destroy Meridian Energy's criminal conspiracy. "How long?" Evan asked. 6 hours for the complete upload, but the most damaging files will be transmitted in the first 2 hours, enough to trigger investigations and media coverage, even if we're interrupted. They settled into vigilant waiting, monitoring the upload progress while staying alert for any signs of discovery. The storm continued to rage outside, providing natural cover for their activities, but also creating an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos that matched their internal tension. "Clara," Evan said during a lull in the thunder, "after tonight, after this is all over, where will you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere with different weather, maybe. Somewhere Meridian Energy doesn't have business interests." She glanced at him sideways. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about having lost everything. I don't think that's true." "What do you mean?" "I think you've found something here. In Millbrook Bay, I mean. Something worth more than the career you lost or the life you've been running from." Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching the progress bars crawl across the screen. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of vulnerability he hadn't heard before. "I think I've found someone worth risking everything for. Someone who understands that justice matters more than safety, that some fights are worth having even when the odds are impossible." "Clara, I know. This isn't the time or place for personal declarations. But if we don't survive tonight, I wanted you to know that these past few days have meant more to me than all the years I spent building my corporate career." Before Evan could respond, the laptop chimed with an urgent alert. Clara's face went pale as she read the message on her screen. "What is it?" "Meridian's security forces. They've traced the upload to this geographical area. We've got maybe 30 minutes before they narrow it down to this building." "How much of the evidence has been transmitted?" "About 60%. Enough to trigger investigations, but not enough to guarantee convictions." Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard, optimizing the remaining upload priorities. "We need more time." Evan looked out at the storm-lashed harbor, where Clara's yacht sat hidden among the other vessels. In 30 minutes, their sanctuary would become a trap, and they would be forced to run or fight. "Then we make time," he said grimly, "whatever it takes." The battle for Tommy Callahan's justice was about to begin. Clara's laptop screen flickered and died. For a heartbeat, Evan thought the storm had caused a power outage. Then Clara's face went completely white, and he realized that the sudden darkness was far more sinister than any natural phenomenon. "They've found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain hammering against the library windows. "Remote shutdown. They're inside our network." "How is that possible?" Clara's hands shook as she tried to restart the laptop. "Because someone who knows my security protocols is helping them. Someone who understands exactly how I've been staying hidden for 5 years. The laptop screen flickered back to life, but instead of Clara's file transfer interface, it displayed a video call window. The face that appeared made Clara recoil, as if she'd been struck. "Doctor." Michael Reeves looked exactly as Clara remembered him: sandy hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of earnest expression that had once made her believe he shared her commitment to environmental responsibility. But his eyes held a coldness that chilled Evan to the bone. "Hello, Clara. It's been a long time." "Michael." Clara's voice was steady, but Evan could see her hands trembling. "I should have known. You always were ambitious enough to sell your soul for the right price." "Ambition had nothing to do with it. This is about loyalty, corporate loyalty, which you've apparently forgotten." Michael's image leaned forward, and Evan could see what looked like a corporate office behind high-expensive furniture, panoramic windows, the trappings of executive power. "Do you have any idea how much damage your little crusade has caused? How many good people have lost their jobs because of your vindictive fantasies?" "Good people?" Clara's composure cracked slightly. "Michael, you helped me develop the safety protocols that they've been systematically ignoring. You know as well as I do that Tommy Callahan and dozens of others were murdered to protect profit margins. Tommy Callahan died because he couldn't follow simple safety procedures. The company conducted a thorough investigation, and operator error was clearly established." Michael's tone carried the practiced authority of someone who'd repeated the same lie so many times he'd begun to believe it himself. "What you call murder, I call unfortunate workplace accidents that have been blown out of proportion by a disgruntled former employee with obvious psychological issues." Evan found his voice. "You bastard! I'm Tommy's brother, and I know he didn't make any mistakes. He was the most safety-conscious worker in that plant." Michael's gaze shifted to Evan with predatory interest. "Ah, the local muscle. Yes, we know all about you, Mr. Callahan. Struggling boat mechanic, bitter widower, raising a teenage daughter on whatever scraps you can earn in this backwater fishing village. Hardly the ideal witness for a credible investigation. Fuck you." Such eloquence. I can see why Clara was drawn to your particular brand of small-town charm. Michael's smile was razor-thin. "But I'm afraid your little romance is about to end very badly." "Michael, what do you want?" Clara asked. "I want you to stop this insanity before it destroys everything we've worked to build. Meridian Energy is on the verge of revolutionary breakthroughs in clean technology. The environmental applications alone could transform how the world generates power. But that work requires capital, infrastructure, and the kind of long-term planning that isn't possible when corporate resources are being wasted on frivolous lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Revolutionary breakthroughs." Clara's voice dripped with contempt. "You mean like the hydrogen fuel cell technology that exploded at the Newark facility? Or the experimental battery systems that contaminated groundwater in 3 different states? Necessary risks in the pursuit of scientific progress. You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. Those weren't eggs, Michael. They were human lives. Acceptable losses in service of a greater good that you're apparently too small-minded to comprehend." Evan stared at the screen in horrified fascination. Michael Reeves wasn't just defending corporate crimes. She genuinely believed that murder and environmental destruction were justified in pursuit of technological advancement. The man was a sociopath with a PhD and a corner office. Clara, you have exactly 10 minutes to delete all copies of your stolen files and surrender yourself to our security team. They're positioned around the library as we speak, waiting for my signal. And if I refuse, then Mr. Callahan and his daughter will join the list of acceptable losses. Michael's casual tone made the threat even more chilling. We know Sadie is staying with her aunt in Boston. Very responsible of you to get her out of harm's way, but Boston isn't nearly far enough to guarantee her safety. Evan felt ice crystallize in his veins. These people were threatening his daughter, the most important person in his world, the only family he had left after Tommy's death. The protective fury that rose in his chest was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. You touch her, and I'll kill you myself. I doubt that very much. But your concern for her welfare is touching and ultimately irrelevant. Clara, 8 minutes. The video call window displayed a countdown timer that began at 8:0 and immediately started ticking backward. Each second brought them closer to a confrontation that Evan was beginning to understand they couldn't win through conventional means. How many people do they have outside? Evan asked. Clara was frantically typing on her laptop, trying to bypass the network intrusion and restore the file transfer protocols. Doesn't matter. Even if we could fight our way out of here, they'd just track us down again. Michael knows every security measure I've ever used, every safe house I've ever established, every contact I've ever cultivated. Then we need to change the game. How? Evan was thinking furiously, drawing on years of solving mechanical problems under pressure. Every system had vulnerabilities, including corporate security operations, staffed by people who thought small-town Americans were too stupid to fight back effectively. Michael, he called toward the laptop screen. You said you know all about me. Struggling boat mechanic, right? That's correct. Then you probably also know that I learned my trade from my father, who learned it from his father before him. 3 generations of Callahans working on boats in Millbrook Bay. Your point? My point is that you don't know shit about what I'm capable of, or what this community is capable of when we're threatened by outside forces. Mr. Callahan, you're hardly in a position to make threats. I'm not making threats. I'm making promises. Evan moved to the library's window and looked out at the storm-lashed harbor. You want to play hardball with people who've been weathering storms longer than your corporation has existed? Let's see how well your security team handles a little local hospitality. He pulled out his cell phone and began dialing numbers from memory. The first call went to Captain Morrison, whose charter boat was equipped with marine radio capable of reaching every vessel in a 50-mile radius. The second call went to Tommy Vasquez, whose lobster boat had been modified with electronics that could have come from a military surplus store. What are you doing? Clara asked. Calling in the cavalry. Within minutes, Evan could see lights beginning to flicker on across the harbor. Fishing boats, pleasure craft, and commercial vessels starting their engines despite the storm. The marine radio crackled to life with terse communications in the coded language that harbor communities used when coordinating emergency responses. Clara, 5 minutes, Michael said from the laptop screen. But his confident tone had developed a slight edge of uncertainty. Michael, you made one critical mistake, Clara said, her fingers still flying across the keyboard. You assumed I was working alone. What do you mean? I mean that while you were busy tracking me down, I was busy making copies, lots of copies, distributed to people who understand exactly what they're holding and what to do with it if something happens to me. It was a bluff, but Michael's expression suggested it was an effective one. Corporate executives lived in fear of information they couldn't control, evidence they couldn't suppress, witnesses they couldn't intimidate or eliminate. You're lying. Maybe. But are you willing to bet Meridian's survival on that assumption? The countdown timer showed 3 minutes and 18 seconds. Outside, the harbor was coming alive with activity that had nothing to do with normal maritime operations. Boats were positioning themselves in patterns that suggested coordination rather than chaos, and the marine radio traffic was increasing exponentially. "Clara, whatever you're planning, it won't work. My security team is professionally trained and heavily armed. Your local fishermen are amateurs playing at soldier. Your security team consists of corporate enforcers who've never faced anything more dangerous than congressional investigators," Evan said. "Our fishermen survive North Atlantic storms for a living. Want to guess who's tougher?" The laptop screen flickered again, and Michael's confident expression was replaced by obvious concern. Someone off-camera was speaking to him urgently, though the words were too muffled to understand. "It seems your cavalry is more effective than anticipated," Michael said when he returned his attention to the video call. "My people are reporting unusual activity throughout the harbor area." "Unusual? How?" Clara asked innocently. "Boats moving in coordinated patterns, radio communications on encrypted frequencies, spotlights being deployed in search configurations." Michael's voice grew sharp with irritation. "What exactly are your fishermen friends planning?" "I have no idea," Evan said truthfully. "But they've been protecting this harbor from outside threats for over a century. I doubt they're going to stop now." The countdown timer showed 1 minute and 43 seconds. Clara's fingers were moving frantically across her keyboard, trying to restore the file transfer before time ran out. "Last chance, Clara. Delete the files and surrender, or face the consequences." "Go to hell, Michael." "As you wish." The laptop screen went dark, and the countdown timer disappeared. For a moment, the library was silent except for the storm outside and the distant sound of boat engines echoing across the water. Then all hell broke loose. The first explosion came from the harbor, a brilliant flash of light followed by thunder that had nothing to do with the storm. Emergency sirens began wailing throughout the town, and the marine radio erupted with urgent communications as Millbrook Bay's defenders engaged Meridian's security forces in a battle that would determine whether justice or corporate power would prevail. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. The emergency radio in the library's reference section crackled to life, its ancient circuits carrying Captain Morrison's weathered voice through the storm-torn night. All vessels, this is harbor control. We have hostile forces attempting to access the main pier. Repeat, hostile forces are moving against the harbor. All fishing vessels to defensive positions. All pleasure craft to safe harbor immediately." Evan lunged for the radio, his years of harbor experience allowing him to operate the unfamiliar equipment intuitively. "Morrison, this is Evan Callahan. What's your situation?" "Evan, where the hell are you? We've got at least 12 armed men moving in from the access road, plus what looks like a command vehicle parked behind the fish processing plant." They came in quiet, but Tommy Vasquez spotted them on his night vision scope. Clara looked up from her laptop, where she'd managed to restore partial connectivity to her upload servers. "How much more time do you need?" Evan asked her. 20 minutes minimum for the critical files. 45 for the complete database. "Morrison, we need to hold them for at least 20 minutes. Can you do that?" "Hell, son, we've been preparing for something like this since the summer people started trying to turn our harbor into their private playground. We can hold them all night if necessary." The radio fell silent except for the background hiss of storm interference. Through the library windows, Evan could see spotlights sweeping across the harbor as boats maneuvered into defensive positions. What had started as a corporate security operation was rapidly escalating into something resembling naval warfare. "This is insane," Clara said, though her fingers never paused in their work to bypass Meridian's electronic interference. "I never intended for anyone else to get hurt because of my evidence. They made that choice when they threatened Sadie, and when they murdered Tommy." Evan checked the ammunition in the .45 pistol he'd retrieved from his truck. "Besides, this community has been waiting for an excuse to push back against corporate bullying for decades. You just gave them a target worthy of their anger." The emergency radio erupted again, this time with Tommy Vasquez's voice cutting through the static. "Harbor Control, this is Seawolf. I've got eyes on the command vehicle." Looks like they're setting up communication equipment and what might be some kind of jamming device. Can you get close enough to disable it? Morrison asked. Negative. Too much open ground, and they've got spotters with night vision. But I might be able to create a distraction if someone can approach from the water side. Evan keyed the radio. Tommy, this is Evan. What kind of distraction? Remember that experimental flare launcher your brother was working on before he died? I might have borrowed his design specs and made a few improvements. Despite the desperate circumstances, Evan smiled grimly. Tommy Callahan had been fascinated by marine pyrotechnics, constantly tinkering with flare guns and emergency signaling devices. If Tommy Vasquez had built something based on his friend's designs, it would be both effective and spectacularly visible. Do it, Evan said. Clara and I will try to approach from the shoreline. Evan, wait. Clara grabbed his arm as he prepared to leave the library. Those men out there are professionals. Former military, private contractors, people trained to kill efficiently and without hesitation. You're a boat mechanic, not a soldier. I'm also the guy who knows every inch of this harbor in the dark, every hiding place, every approach route that might give us an advantage. Evan checked his watch. How much of the evidence has been uploaded? About 30%. Enough to trigger initial investigations, but not enough to guarantee convictions. We need more time. Then we buy more time. Clara saved her work and closed the laptop, sealing it in its waterproof case. If we're doing this, we do it smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We get to the yacht, use its advanced communication systems to boost the upload speed, and let the harbor defenders handle the fighting. Agreed. But first, we need to get past 12 armed men who are specifically looking for us. They made their way through the library's darkened stacks to the rear exit, moving carefully to avoid triggering any motion sensors that Margaret might have missed. The storm provided excellent cover, but it also made navigation treacherous and communication nearly impossible. The back parking lot was empty except for puddles that reflected the occasional lightning flash. Evan's truck sat where he'd left it, but approaching it would require crossing 50 yards of open ground that offered no concealment. Too dangerous. The old storm drain, Evan said, pointing toward a concrete culvert that ran beneath the library toward the harbor. It connects to the marina's utilities access. We can get most of the way to the yacht without being seen. Clara studied the drain opening with obvious distaste. How deep is it? About 4 feet. You'll get wet, but it's better than getting shot. They lowered themselves into the culvert, immediately immersed in knee-deep water that tasted of salt and decades of harbor runoff. The concrete tunnel was completely dark, forcing them to navigate by touch and sound. Above them, thunder crashed with increasing frequency, masking their movement, but also disorienting their sense of direction. "Stop!" Clara whispered after they'd traveled about 100 yards. "Listen." Evan froze, straining to hear over the storm noise. Footsteps splashed somewhere behind them, echoing off the concrete walls, multiple sets, moving with military precision. "They found the tunnel," he said. "Or they're checking every possible escape route. Either way, we can't go back." They pressed forward more quickly, the water deepening as they approached the harbor. Emergency lighting from the marina cast eerie shadows through drain grates above their heads, creating a strobing effect that made depth perception nearly impossible. The tunnel terminated at a large catch basin beneath the marina's main dock. Evan boosted Clara up through the access hatch, then pulled himself onto the dock beside her. They were now less than 50 yards from Clara's yacht, but those 50 yards were completely exposed to observation from multiple directions. "There," Clara pointed toward her boat, its elegant lines barely visible through the driving rain. "If we can reach it, I can boost the upload speed by a factor of 10, using the yacht's satellite communication system." "What about Meridian's jamming?" "My yacht has military-grade countermeasures. It was designed to operate in hostile electronic environments." Before Evan could ask what kind of yacht needed military-grade anything, Tommy Vasquez's distraction announced itself with spectacular effectiveness. The experimental flare launcher sent a cascade of burning magnesium across the harbor. turning night into brilliant day for 30 seconds, while simultaneously deploying what appeared to be chaff designed to confuse electronic surveillance systems. In the chaos that followed, Evan and Clara sprinted across the exposed dock toward her yacht. Behind them, shouts erupted as Meridian's security forces tried to locate the source of the pyrotechnic display while maintaining their perimeter around the library. They reached Clara's yacht just as the flare display ended, plunging the harbor back into storm-lit darkness. Clara's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she activated systems Evan had never seen on a civilian vessel: communication arrays, defensive electronics, and what looked disturbingly like weapon systems. "Clara, what exactly is this boat?" "My escape pod. And our weapon." She powered up the satellite communication system, its displays showing connection strength that far exceeded anything available to civilian users. This yacht was designed by people who understood that sometimes you need to disappear completely, and sometimes you need to fight back effectively. Who designed it? Government contractors who owed me favors, people who believed that corporate whistleblowers deserved better protection than witness relocation programs typically provide. The laptop connected to the yacht's communication system immediately, upload speeds increasing dramatically as Clara's evidence files began flowing to servers around the world at unprecedented rates. "How long now?" Evan asked. 8 minutes for critical files, 15 for everything." The emergency radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "All vessels, be advised. Hostile forces are attempting to approach the marina from multiple directions. They're using the flare display to mask their movement. Can the fishing boats hold them?" "For a while, but they're professionals, and we're just stubborn fishermen with more courage than sense." Clara looked up from her laptop. "There's something else. The yacht's passive sensors are detecting additional hostiles approaching from the water. Fast boats, probably military-style rigid inflatables." "How many?" "At least 3, maybe more. They're running silent, but the yacht's sonar is picking up their wakes." Evan realized that Meridian's security operation was far larger and more sophisticated than they'd anticipated. This wasn't just corporate enforcement, it was a military-style assault designed to eliminate all witnesses and evidence simultaneously. "Clara, we need to run now." "No, we need to fight. The upload is too critical to abandon now." Clara's hands moved across control panels that resembled those of a naval vessel more than a pleasure yacht. "Besides, running will just get more people killed. Better to end this here." "How?" Clara's smile was sharp as a blade. "By showing these corporate bastards what happens when they threaten people I care about." The yacht's weapon systems came online with a low hum that spoke of serious military hardware concealed beneath an elegant civilian exterior. Whatever Clara's boat really was, it had been designed for exactly this kind of confrontation. "Evan, in 2 minutes this harbor is going to become a war zone. Last chance to change your mind." Evan thought about Tommy, working late shifts to protect his fellow employees. About Sadie, safely away in Boston but still threatened by corporate assassins. About 5 years of unanswered questions and suppressed rage, finally finding a target worthy of his fury. Let's finish this. The battle for Millbrook Bay was about to reach its climax, and the outcome would determine whether justice or corporate power would prevail in the storm-swept darkness of the New England coast. The first Meridian assault boat emerged from the storm like a predator, materializing from primordial darkness. Its black hull cut through the harbor chop with military precision, mounted spotlights sweeping the marina in search of Clara's yacht. Behind it, 2 more craft spread into attack formation, their movements coordinated with the efficiency of special operations forces. "Contact," Clara announced, her voice steady despite the approaching threat. 3 rigid inflatables, approximately 30 feet each, armed personnel, probably ex-military contractors. Evan watched through the yacht's sophisticated optics as the lead boat adjusted course toward their position. Its occupants wore tactical gear and carried weapons that definitely weren't standard security equipment. This was an assassination squad, not a corporate enforcement team. How long until the upload completes? 4 minutes for critical files. The evidence about Tommy's murder and the other confirmed kills will be transmitted in the next 60 seconds. Clara's hands moved across control panels that transformed her elegant yacht into something resembling a naval command center. Weapon systems cycled online, defensive countermeasures activated, and communication arrays began broadcasting on frequencies that would ensure global distribution of her evidence. The harbor around them erupted into chaotic warfare as Millbrook Bay's fishing fleet engaged Meridian's forces. Captain Morrison's charter boat had positioned itself between the marina and the approaching assault craft, its deck modified with what appeared to be commercial fishing equipment repurposed for combat. Tommy Vasquez's lobster boat circled like a shark, using superior knowledge of local waters to harry the corporate forces while avoiding direct confrontation. "Evan, I need you to understand something," Clara said as she configured the yacht's defensive systems. "What I'm about to do will change everything. This boat isn't just equipped for self-defense, it's designed to fight back against exactly this kind of corporate aggression." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that some very dangerous people helped me prepare for this moment. People who believe that corporate criminals should face the same kind of justice they've been dispensing to whistleblowers and environmental activists." Before Evan could ask for clarification, Clara activated a system that made the yacht's deck plates hum with electromagnetic energy. Hidden weapon ports opened along the hull, revealing armaments that had been concealed beneath the vessel's civilian appearance. "Jesus Christ, Clara, what is this thing?" "Justice," she said simply. "Delayed, but not denied." The lead assault boat accelerated toward them, its crew apparently unaware that they were approaching a target capable of defending itself. Their confidence lasted exactly 12 seconds, the time it took for Clara's yacht to demonstrate why maritime law enforcement agencies had been so interested in her experimental vessel designs. The modified flare gun that Evan had cobbled together from his brother's plans appeared in his hands like a gift from Tommy's ghost. Unlike standard marine flares, this device had been designed to deliver payloads that could disable electronic systems and temporarily blind surveillance equipment. "On my mark," Clara said, her finger hovering over what looked suspiciously like a military fire control system. "Target the lead boat's engine compartment. Disable, don't destroy. I want prisoners who can testify about Meridian's criminal operations." "Understood." The assault boat closed to within 50 yards, close enough for Evan to see the faces of its crew. Hard men with dead eyes, the kind of people who killed for money and slept soundly afterward. They thought they were hunting a corporate fugitive and a small-town boat mechanic. They were about to learn otherwise. "Mark." Evan's flare gun discharged with a sound like controlled thunder, sending its modified payload in a perfect arc toward the assault boat's stern. The device struck the engine housing and exploded in a cascade of burning magnesium and electromagnetic pulse energy that instantly killed the boat's propulsion and navigation systems. Simultaneously, Clara's yacht unleashed a defensive barrage that would have impressed naval warfare specialists. Non-lethal but devastating, her weapons disabled the assault boat's communications, blinded its surveillance systems, and left its crew floating helplessly in the storm-tossed harbor. "One down," Clara announced with grim satisfaction. 2 to go. The remaining assault boats immediately changed tactics, spreading wider and approaching from different angles. Their crews had realized that their target wasn't the helpless civilian vessel they'd expected, and they were adapting with professional efficiency. "They're calling for backup," Clara said, monitoring intercepted communications. "At least 6 more boats en route from their command vessel. ETA, 15 minutes. Can we hold them that long?" "We can try. But Evan, if something happens to Maeve, they manage to disable the yacht or take me out, you need to ensure the evidence reaches the right people." "Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me. This evidence is bigger than either of us. It's bigger than Tommy's death or my need for revenge. It represents justice for thousands of victims who never got the chance to fight back." Evan looked at Clara's determined expression, seeing echoes of the same fierce commitment that had driven his brother to risk everything for the safety of other workers. She was right. This was about more than personal vengeance. It was about holding corporate criminals accountable for decades of systematic murder and environmental destruction. I promise. But we're both walking away from this. The second assault boat launched what appeared to be a boarding attempt, its crew preparing to rappel onto the yacht's deck from attack helicopters that materialized out of the storm like mechanical vultures. But Clara's defensive systems included countermeasures that made such tactics suicidal. Electromagnetic barriers erupted around the yacht's perimeter, creating fields of energy that would disable any electronic equipment, including the sophisticated systems keeping the helicopters airborne. The corporate forces found themselves forced to maintain distance, unable to close for the quick capture they'd planned. "Upload complete for critical files," Clara announced. Tommy's murder, the other confirmed kills, and the environmental cover-ups are now in the hands of federal investigators, international news organizations, and environmental watchdog groups. Meridian can't suppress this anymore. What about the rest? Still transmitting. Full database will be complete in 8 minutes. The harbor battle raged around them as Millbrook Bay's defenders proved that local knowledge and stubborn courage could match professional military training. Tommy Vasquez had somehow acquired depth charges, probably illegally modified lobster. Trapsand was using them to create underwater explosions that disoriented the assault boats without causing permanent damage. Captain Morrison's charter boat had become a floating fortress, its crew using everything from modified fishing equipment to surplus Coast Guard armaments to hold the corporate forces at bay. Other fishing vessels circled like wolves, using superior numbers and intimate knowledge of local waters to prevent Meridian's forces from establishing coordinated attack positions. "Evan, look at this." Clara pointed to her communication display, which showed incoming messages from news organizations around the world. The evidence is already being picked up. BBC, CNN, Reuters, The Guardian, everyone's running with the story. What are they saying? Corporate death squads, systematic environmental terrorism, largest industrial conspiracy in American history. Meridian's stock price has already dropped 40% in after-hours trading. But their celebration was premature. The yacht's passive sensors detected new contacts approaching from the open ocean larger vessels with the electromagnetic signatures of military hardware. Meridian's reinforcements weren't just additional security teams, they were bringing serious firepower to bear on what they now recognized as a threat to their corporate survival. "Clara, we need to go. Now. 2 more minutes for complete transmission. We can't abandon it now, not when we're this close." The third assault boat had been circling at maximum range, apparently serving as a command and control platform for the corporate forces. Now it accelerated toward them in what looked like a suicide run, its crew apparently willing to sacrifice themselves to prevent the complete evidence upload. Evan raised his modified flare gun, but at this range and in these sea conditions, accuracy would be a matter of luck rather than skill. Clara's yacht weapon systems were designed for defensive engagement, not long-range precision strikes. "I've got an idea," Evan said, remembering his brother's fascination with marine electronics and improvised engineering solutions. "Tommy always said that the best weapon was the one your enemy didn't see coming." He grabbed Tommy's old toolkit from the yacht's emergency locker, a battered collection of wrenches and gauges that had somehow found their way aboard Clara's vessel, along with his brother's factory ID badge. But these weren't just ordinary tools. Tommy had modified them over the years, adding electronic components and wireless capabilities that turned simple mechanical devices into sophisticated surveillance and countermeasures equipment. "What are you doing?" Something Tommy would have done, something that uses their own technology against them. Evan activated a device that looked like a standard marine multimeter, but functioned as a powerful electromagnetic pulse generator. Tommy had designed it to disable malfunctioning boat electronics safely, but with the right modifications, it could do much more than that. The approaching assault boat was 50 yards away and closing fast when Evan triggered Tommy's final gift to the fight for justice. The electromagnetic pulse spread outward from the yacht like an invisible wave, washing over the corporate forces with energy that shut down every electronic system within a quarter-mile radius, including, unfortunately, Clara's yacht. As darkness fell across their defensive systems and the evidence upload ground to a halt with seconds remaining, Evan realized that their victory had come at a cost that might prove fatal. The corporate forces were disabled, but so were they. And in the sudden electronic silence, they could hear the approach of Meridian's reinforcements, larger vessels with backup power systems that had weathered Tommy's electromagnetic storm intact. The real battle was just beginning. In the electromagnetic darkness that followed Tommy's final gift, Evan worked by feel and memory to restore Clara's yacht systems. His brother's tools, modified with wireless capabilities and backup power sources, became the key to their survival as corporate reinforcements approached through the storm. "How much of the upload completed?" Evan asked, his hands moving across control panels that Tommy's designs had taught him to understand. 96%, Clara replied, her voice tight with frustration. "Everything except the financial records that could have sent Meridian's board to prison for life. Can you restart it?" "Not without full power to the communication array, and that requires rebooting systems that take at least 5 minutes to come online." Through the yacht's darkened windows, they could see the approaching silhouettes of Meridian's reinforcements, 3 vessels that dwarfed the assault boats they'd already defeated. The lead ship looked military in all but name, bristling with communication equipment and what appeared to be serious weaponry. "Evan," Clara said quietly, "I need you to know something. Before this started, before I came to Millbrook Bay, I wasn't sure I believed in justice anymore. 5 years of running, hiding, watching Meridian destroy lives while their executives got richer was wearing away my faith that good could triumph over evil. And now I've seen what happens when ordinary people decide to stand up for what's right. Your brother, you, this entire community, you've reminded me why the fight matters." Evan felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the yacht's heating system and everything to do with the remarkable woman beside him. But before he could respond, Tommy's modified radio crackled to life with a transmission that changed everything. "Millbrook Bay, this is Coast Guard Cutter Portland. We are responding to reports of armed conflict in your harbor. All vessels stand down immediately and prepare for boarding." Clara and Evan exchanged glances. The Coast Guard's arrival could be salvation or disaster, depending on how deeply Meridian's influence had penetrated federal law enforcement agencies. "This is Dr. Clara Sinclair, aboard the research vessel Integrity," Clara responded, using her yacht's emergency transmitter. "I am a federal whistleblower under active protection status. The armed vessels in this harbor are corporate security forces attempting to prevent disclosure of criminal evidence." "Dr. Sinclair, this is Commander Sarah Chen, U.S. Coast Guard. We have been monitoring your evidence transmissions for the past hour. Federal marshals are en route to secure your position and take custody of all evidence." Evan started. "Chen, any relation to Margaret?" Clara's face broke into the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all night. "Commander Chen is Margaret's daughter, the one who joined the Coast Guard after her father died in that factory accident." "The cavalry isn't coming," Evan said with growing realization. "The cavalry is already here." The Coast Guard cutter Portland emerged from the storm like an avenging angel, her deck guns trained on Meridian's reinforcement vessels. Behind her came 2 more cutters and what appeared to be a federal law enforcement command, ship overwhelming force that reduced the corporate security operation from military assault to criminal conspiracy in a matter of minutes. "All Meridian vessels, this is the United States Coast Guard. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." The corporate reinforcements found themselves surrounded by federal vessels with far superior firepower and absolute legal authority. Their military-style assault had become a trap that would provide additional evidence of Meridian's criminal operations. But victory came with a price that nearly broke Evan's heart. "Clara, look at the financial data files, the ones that didn't upload." She pulled up the incomplete transmission logs, and her face went pale. "They're corrupted. The electromagnetic pulse damaged the storage drives before the upload could complete." "What does that mean?" "It means we have evidence of the murders, the environmental crimes, the systematic cover-ups, but not the financial records that would have implicated Meridian's board of directors and major shareholders. The people at the top will probably escape prosecution." Evan felt rage build in his chest like a physical force. They'd come so close to complete justice, only to have it slip away because of the same electromagnetic weapon that had saved their lives. "No," he said firmly. "Tommy didn't die so that corporate executives could walk away from their crimes on technicalities." He grabbed Tommy's toolkit and began pulling out devices that most people would have dismissed as ordinary mechanical equipment. But Evan had spent years learning his brother's modifications, understanding the electronic components hidden within seemingly simple tools. "What are you doing?" Tommy was paranoid about data security. He always made backup copies of everything important. Evan held up what looked like a standard torque wrench, but functioned as a wireless storage device. If he was investigating Meridian's safety violations, if he'd found evidence of financial crimes, the wrench's hidden display activated, showing terabytes of data that Tommy had collected during his months of investigation. Financial records, bank transfers, shell company documentation, everything needed to prove that Meridian's crimes went straight to the top of their corporate hierarchy. "Tommy knew," Clara whispered, staring at the evidence that had been hidden in his brother's tools for 5 years. "He knew about the financial conspiracy, and he documented everything before they killed him." "He was always smarter than me," Evan said, tears mixing with rain on his face. "Even dead, he's still protecting people." Clara connected Tommy's hidden storage device to her yacht's restored communication system. The financial evidence began uploading immediately, completing the dataset that would destroy Meridian Energy's criminal empire once and for all. "Upload complete," she announced as federal agents began boarding the disabled corporate vessels around them. Every piece of evidence, every financial record, every communication that proves systematic criminal conspiracy. It's all out there now. Commander Chen's voice came over the radio with news that made their victory complete. "Dr. Sinclair, Mr. Callahan, we have federal arrest warrants for 47 Meridian Energy executives, including CEO Michael Reeves. The evidence you've provided has triggered the largest corporate criminal investigation in FBI history." Evan looked out across Millbrook Bay, where Coast Guard cutters were taking corporate assassins into federal custody, while local fishing boats returned to their moorings like conquering heroes. The storm was finally breaking, revealing the first hints of dawn on the eastern horizon. "It's over," Clara said, her voice mixing exhaustion with profound relief. "No," Evan replied, thinking about Tommy's sacrifice and the community that had risked everything to support their fight for justice. "It's just beginning." The evidence they'd released would trigger investigations, prosecutions, and reforms that would protect countless future victims from corporate crimes. Tommy Callahan's death would finally have the meaning he'd died trying to achieve. And in the growing light of a new day, Evan Callahan and Clara Sinclair had found something neither of them had expected: hope for a future where justice was possible and love could grow from the ashes of shared struggle. The battle for Millbrook Bay was over, but the war for corporate accountability had just begun. 6 months later, Evan stood on the same pier where Clara had first arrived in Millbrook Bay, watching his daughter unveil her latest art installation. The memorial sculpture rose from the harbor's edge like a testament to renewal-twisted metal that had once been part of Meridian Energy's chemical processing equipment, transformed by Sadie's artistic vision into something that spoke of both loss and hope. The memorial to corporate victims incorporated Clara's advanced marine technology in ways that would have made Tommy proud. Solar panels designed from Clara's clean energy patents powered LED displays that cycled through the names of workers who had died in industrial accidents over the past 3 decades. Water circulation systems, based on the same technology that had once powered Clara's yacht, created gentle fountains that seemed to wash the names clean while preserving their memory. "She's remarkable," Clara said, joining Evan at the railing. The past 6 months had changed Hearth. Constant wariness was gone, replaced by the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing the fight had been worth the cost. Sadie has managed to turn instruments of destruction into symbols of healing. "She gets that from her mother," Evan replied. Though privately he thought Sadie's fierce determination to honor the dead while building something beautiful for the living came from sources that transcended simple genetics. The federal prosecutions had exceeded even Clara's optimistic expectations. Michael Reeves and 36 other Meridian executives were awaiting trial on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to systematic environmental terrorism. The company itself had been dissolved, its assets liquidated to create a victim compensation fund that would provide support for affected communities for decades to come. But the most satisfying outcome, from Evan's perspective, was watching Millbrook Bay transform itself from a struggling fishing village into something approaching a model community. Clara's clean marine technology had attracted investment from environmental organizations and responsible corporations that wanted to demonstrate sustainable coastal development. The harbor now hosted research vessels alongside fishing boats, and the economy had diversified beyond simple survival. "Any word from Washington?" Evan asked. "Congressional hearings start next month. They want us both to testify about corporate accountability and the need for stronger whistleblower protections." Clara's smile held traces of the same fierce determination that had driven her 5-year fight for justice. "Senator Williams thinks our story could help pass legislation that would prevent future cover-ups." "You mean Tommy's story?" "Tommy's story, our story, they're all part of the same fight now." Sadie approached them with paint still drying on her hands and the satisfied expression of an artist who'd successfully translated vision into reality. At 18, she'd grown into the kind of young woman who turned heads not just because of her beauty, but because of the quiet intensity that marked her as someone who would make her mark on the world. "So what do you think?" she asked, gesturing toward the memorial. "I think your uncle would have loved it," Evan said honestly. "He always believed that beautiful things could grow from terrible circumstances if people were willing to do the work." "Clara helped with the technical stuff," Sadie said, her tone carrying the kind of casual acknowledgement that suggested Clara's presence in their lives had become as natural as breathing. "Her water circulation design is going to be featured in next month's Environmental Engineering Journal." "It's a collaboration," Clara said diplomatically. "The artistic vision is entirely Sadie's. I just provided some mechanical support." Evan watched the easy interaction between his daughter and the woman who had become so much more than just a customer with boat trouble. The three of them had formed something that felt like family, not the traditional nuclear unit he'd once taken for granted, but something harder won, and perhaps more precious, because of the struggles that had forged it. "Dad, Clara, there's something I want to ask you both." Sadie's serious tone caught their attention immediately. Over the past 6 months, she'd become the family mediator, the one who addressed practical issues that the adults were sometimes too polite or too emotionally invested to raise directly. "What's on your mind?" Evan asked. "Are you two ever going to admit that you're in love with each other, or are you planning to spend the rest of your lives dancing around it like teenagers?" Evan felt heat creep up his neck, but Clara just laughed, the first completely unself-conscious sound he'd heard from her since the night they'd first kissed in the aftermath of their victory over Meridian. "Your daughter has excellent observational skills," Clara said to Evan. "I wonder where she gets that from." "Probably from her mother. Sarah was always direct about things that mattered." "Well then," Clara said, taking his hand with the kind of decisiveness that had once made her a successful corporate executive and later an effective whistleblower. Maybe it's time to be direct about this. She turned to face him fully, her eyes holding the same courage that had sustained her through 5 years of running and fighting and never giving up hope that justice was possible. Evan Callahan, I love you. I love your stubborn commitment to doing the right thing, even when it's dangerous. I love the way you've raised your daughter to be strong and independent and kind. I love that you're the kind of man who would risk everything to honor his brother's memory. And I love that you've made it possible for me to believe in home again. Clara Sinclair, Evan replied, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I love you too. I love your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to let evil go unpunished, even when fighting it cost you everything. I love that you've taught my daughter to see beauty in broken things and hope in impossible circumstances. And I love that you've made it possible for me to believe in the future again. Sadie applauded with paint-stained hands, grinning with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully orchestrated a long-overdue moment of honesty. Finally. Now, are you going to get married or what? Sadie, Evan protested, but Clara was already laughing again. Actually, Clara said thoughtfully, that's not a terrible idea. We could have the ceremony right here, with the memorial as a backdrop. Tommy would be part of the celebration. Is that a proposal? Evan asked. It's a suggestion. The proposal comes later, when you've had time to think about whether you really want to be married to a former corporate fugitive who attracts federal attention wherever she goes. Clara, in case you hadn't noticed, I'm a boat mechanic from a small fishing village who just helped bring down one of America's largest corporations. I think we're probably equally likely to attract interesting attention. As the afternoon sun painted Millbrook Bay in shades of gold and amber, the three of them stood together beside Sadie's memorial to the victims of corporate greed. Around them, the harbor bustled with the activities of a community that had found new purpose in the aftermath of their fight for justice. Fishing boats prepared for the evening's lobster haul. Research vessels collected data that would help protect the coastal environment for future generations. And in the distance, Clara's yacht, permanently moored and converted into a floating museum dedicated to corporate accountabilities, served as a reminder that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Tommy Callahan's fight for worker safety had become a catalyst for changes that would protect countless lives. His death had found meaning in the courage of people who refused to let his sacrifice be forgotten. And in the gentle sound of water flowing through Sadie's memorial fountains, his brother could almost hear Tommy's voice saying what he'd always said when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. One step at a time, little brother, one step at a time. The future stretched ahead like an uncharted harbor, full of possibilities that seemed less daunting when faced together. Justice had been served, love had been acknowledged, and hope had taken root in ground that had once seemed barren. In Millbrook Bay, the tide was finally turning towards something better,